and then they start getting better. But right as they start getting better, the other one in chat, and he gets sick, and then it's like a chain. And it just
Finally,
keeps going.
you get sick.
Yeah.
As far as I
And
know,
then
the
there's no one to
batteries.
take
You're
care
the
of you.
mom, and then you're not allowed to get sick if you're the mom.
Oh no, that's totally
really?
unforgivable.
Everything falls apart when the mom gets sick.
Well, that's true.
The
So she
center
can be sick, but she's
will
on
not
track
hold.
that she's sick.
Okay.
So,
That's how it is in my household.
Huh. That's
Well,
rough.
good evening. You're
I think
welcome.
it's pretty standard.
It's still in Forge Day.
Guess you noticed that it's dark out now.
Oops, I'm sorry.
Actually,
Already.
it's been dark pretty much the whole time we've had class, I guess. But we are getting down to just a few weeks left. We have tonight, obviously, but next week, keep in mind that we're closed for Thanksgiving, even though it's Friday. That whole weekend, including Wednesday, was a surprise for me for some reason.
So all of campus is closed?
Wednesday through Friday.
Well, Wednesdays, the campus is actually open, but there are no classes.
Got it.
Okay.
So if you need to stop in to use the study halls or whatever,
Well, I actually have I have other classes that I actually have a lab access for, and I can go to the lab after hours, but not on holidays or closures. So.
however, we do meet back again on the 30th. For those of you that are here, if you don't travel someplace during the holidays. And then we have a meeting, this is my understanding how the schedule should work. We will be here December 7th, but finals begin the next week. So that's unusual. Usually our finals in the fall are the first week of December, but for some reason our finals are the second week of December. So we should be here the 14th for our final meeting. But keep in mind that our final meeting is mandatory for me. I have to be here to make sure we have the total amount of time face to face. But it's up to you. If you want to come, if you have a conflict or something else, I don't consider
Is that the 14th?
That's the 14th. Of course, notice I haven't considered attendance mandatory regardless, so that's no change. Although I don't intend to actually cover anything that I think extremely vital at all on the last meeting. Instead, we will have a discussion maybe about the postmodern dilemma, and or not, and then maybe I'll have a set of videos that you get to select from so that we could pick a movie. Some of the ones I have, for example, talked about Ex Machina or Machina, however you prefer to pronounce it.
Actually, I have it on my hard drive on my desktop right now.
And then I have The Circle, which I think is philosophically interesting.
I would be very interested to see that. I've had difficulty obtaining a copy.
I think I just bought mine from Amazon. Maybe I bought it in a store. I do not remember. It was a while ago. I also have the movie Wittgenstein. That was hard to get. Because initially when the movie came out, it was only in European format, which doesn't work here on any of our machines. But when it did come out in American format, I ordered a copy and got it, and it works fine. And I've used it in class before, and it's interesting.
There are allegedly some patches or programs or whatnot where you can play out of region DVDs. So
It's I don't know if you can select it, but most DVD players have an option where you can choose NTSC or PAL version, and that will allow you to play out of region DVDs.
I'm not actually planning on choosing to buy any more DVDs ever. I
Now
bought
everything is
these.
streaming, right?
I bought these back not that long ago, but it seems like DVDs are going the way of Betamax and VHS.
No. I love my DVDs and CDs. I'm not letting go of them ever.
I have friends that said the same thing about the, you know, the other formats too. I have friends that have the big video discs. They bought those. Swore, this is going to be the format of the future. That's gone.
You know that Beta was actually technically superior to VHS.
They said that.
VHS won out basically
I
just by
understand.
weight of volume.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of
Which
like
is
Microsoft products, lower
however it
quality but
works.
higher user base.
Yep.
I still have, well, no, actually, I finally did throw it out. I threw it out. An 8-track player.
You should not have thrown that out. That could be collectible. I'm sure there's a museum who would purchase that.
Nope. No. There isn't.
I know a pawn shop that will.
However, so there will be some movies that I'll bring in. I also have Monty Python movies. If somebody's dying for flashbacks or whatever the heck.
I'm not dead. Yes, you are. no,
Monty
I'm
Python.
not dead.
Ridiculous, or no, not ridiculous. Religulous. The Bill Maher critique.
Ooh, that
of
would be
religion
interesting.
Was so I have a stack of philosophically interesting movies that I will bring. We could also have a party, you know, but no beer, no, we can't make a mess, you know, we have to be responsible. All that stuff.
I'm too boring for a party. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, I don't gamble.
I don't either, so we would actually be fine. Actually, I do drink, but not at parties.
Huh?
I'm one of those that wait until I get home and I hide in the closet. No, I'm kidding. I sit there with my computer and read the Washington Post. And the brandy helps me get through it. You know. You need something, you know.
Did
Trump did what?
Did you see the article in the Washington Post just recently about a person who had false accusations made of assault against them, and they were facing life in prison for torture and so forth? Unfortunately, they had a time-dated, time-stamped selfie and
Wow.
witnesses that
Yes.
showed that they were somewhere else, and the whole thing was a complete, total hoax fabrication.
Jeez.
He almost went to life, and he almost went to prison for life for a complete fabrication.
So, and as far as emailing me, notice that by the 14th, I need your term papers if you haven't sent them to me already. Some of you have sent in such good final drafts that they're basically done.
He'll have
The
something for you
third
soon.
exam is due on the 7th. You can actually send both in to me at the very last date if you're in that kind of a situation. The main thing though is that I need everything by the time we get to the weekend of the final session, which would be the 14th. Because I have to turn grades in on time where they shoot us. And, you know, as you can see, I have not been shot, and I don't intend to be shot.
I'm actually completing my chemistry lab class during the next week, and then after I
You-
finish my chemistry lab
you don't
class,
have to tell
I'll have
us.
something
We're
more
okay.
for you. I'll have something soon for you.
Just so long as I get everything.
I will have something soon for you.
Yes, yes, you could send it early.
That's what
There's no
I'll have
problem.
it early.
take advantage of it.
It's just so long as I have it on file. And if for any reason I need to email you and say, hey, I'm missing your whatever, that's kind of scary for me, because when I turn in the grades, that's it. And if I don't have something, I'll not have the points for that. And that means I'd be giving you less than the A that I would love to give everybody.
I promise you I will have something
And-
soon for you.
You know, it's just that they've made it absolutely miserable trying to, you know, you have to, if you have to change a grade, you have to literally crawl on your hands, you know, and knees, you know, up to the dean. I'm sorry, it was all my, you know, it's in the mud.
With a sacrifice.
dead
Right.
chicken, or something,
Well, we wouldn't want to put them through that.
just, all right, who will not,
Agreed.
No,
Cannot
no
trade.
making us do anything to fix something, so make sure you're right. So that's from here to the end of the course. Tonight, we're looking at a repeat of Kant to take off of the Kantian answer to Hume. So if you remember, Hume put empiricism in the position where they reached their ultimate conclusion, and that is that the only thing you can possibly know is what you're experiencing at the moment. And that turns out to be phenomena. And so if you're Kant, you're faced with this: can metaphysics continue? Can we actually have metaphysics? Because if all we have is phenomena, then there's nothing else that we can do really to answer how phenomena is coherent, how it arranges itself, how we can tell that colors or tastes are the same. It doesn't seem logical because nothing can be both in two places at once. And yet, when we're experiencing the same colors, it seems like there must be something that's in two places at once. This chocolate tastes just like chocolate tasted when I was a kid, but there's no way it could have existed in multiple times in the universe. How do we explain any of that? And further, how do I know that I have an I? So it seems like there's no self, right? And we've talked about that before. I noticed that we've accepted that as an actual problem for us. There's no persistent self. Instead, we have different systems or processes that we've kind of given names to. So I have a conceptual schema that I think of as me. It's in a sense false because there is no single object that is a persistent self over time. I'm instead just basically using these sociological conceptual schemas, which, by the way, can be different depending on your culture, your language, etc. So, the problem of this beset Kant, and he tried to answer it, and he said, well, we can transcend this limit and say that, well, even though phenomena is all that we can possibly experience, because it is experience, basically. Remember, the phenomenologist Husserl attempted to basically create a science that was based totally on just cataloging experience, phenomena, right? But Kant gives us the argument that there must be a self, and that's having the experience. There must be a thing, the thing itself, which is interacting with us. He also goes further, remember, with his argument to give us his argument that there is a God. He disagrees with the cosmological, the ontological, and teleological arguments. But the Kantian argument is that morality is pointless. If there is no God, anything essentially is permitted. There's no restrictions. Morality makes no sense. So there must be a God, says Kant. But we can't actually know anything about God. Practically everybody is of that opinion today. There must be a God. On the other hand, by the definition we use for that, besides the fact that it proves that God must exist, it doesn't give you anything else that you can do with God. And there must be an I, and nonetheless, Kant gives us, time must exist, but it exists for us, so that we're the ones that impose our perspective of time on the phenomena. It's not something that's inherent in the phenomena, it's us, right? And then space is also there with regard to that experience that we think of as dimensional. Because dimensional experiences have to take place in space. But both of those come from us. Remember the stupid argument about the magic marker? You know, remember, it's we that give it the space. I take it away, notice the space is still there. I don't know how that proof actually is supposed to be convincing. He does it with oranges. It might be more convincing with oranges. Which would have been a really unique thing, actually, at the time, you know, because most students wouldn't have ever seen an orange. And then this is Kant's categories, which are essentially the Aristotelian categories, with the reversal being that instead of the categories being characteristics of the phenomena, it's instead characteristics of our perception. So that we, by being human, categorize everything in all these different ways. The follow-up, though, the very next generation, Gottlob Fichte, who I should, if I showed you an ugly picture of Gottlob Fichte. Oh, I accidentally hit the Stanford Encyclopedia about that. I don't think they give us any pictures, do they? They never do. Let's go back to Wikipedia, because if you want to see an ugly picture, you've got to go to the good online encyclopedia. Isn't that funny how that it's taken years, but it's just really trounced every other resource. So there's Gottlob Fichte, slightly older than Hegel. So he was the intermediary. Kant would have been too old to have influenced Hegel and his roommate Schelling and his other roommate Hölderlin, which is still kind of an amazing triumvirate, if you can imagine those three genii, right? Oral genius. So that must have been an interest. Pardon?
Is genie really the plural?
I believe so. We might say geniuses. I don't know. I could call Mensa and ask them.
They would know.
Pardon?
Except they would know.
Actually, not.
Oh.
They're. I know the club here in town, and they're not the swiftest bunch of.
Wait a second, you're telling me that Mensa, they're in Anchorage anyways, isn't that great?
No, they're, well, I'm not, there's a couple autistic math people.
Okay.
So, it depends on what you mean by brilliance, right?
Fair enough.
There's lots of different kinds of intelligence, emotional
True.
intelligence. Trump is a stable genius, he's told us that.
He's so funny.
It's the same stable where they had raised Budweisers, right?
I have a question about
Yes.
the morality that you were talking about.
Yes.
You said that he didn't believe that morality was an innate thing or something? Or where does he think it comes from?
Well, basically, if you think of God as representing the absolute, so if it's kind of like a mathematical argument that if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, why is 2 more than 3?
Not more than
Well, it is. No, I mean, 3 is more than 2,
that?
right? And we know that because the infinite number is the highest number,
Right.
right? So you have to, and it's kind of weird because if we want, we can go the opposite way too, can't we?
Mm-hmm. But you gotta put a negative sign in.
Yeah, you have to put the negative sign over there. But so if I'm saying that, say, this is the best music that America produced in 2010,
The way I think of it is that one is neither good nor bad, two is neither good nor bad, three is neither good nor bad, four is neither good nor bad, moralistically. But in comparison to each other, they may be good or bad depending on the context in which they're used.
Well, I don't
Okay,
mean
like,
so-
if you're under the assumption that more is better, then you're saying.
Right.
That you
But,
keep that, that's
but in
not
golf,
actually-
less is better.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You see, so
Uh-huh.
the moralism.
even that
is-
idea about more being better. That's a very
It is hard out here for a
stereotypically
pimp.
Western.
Now that might seem like an
thing.
unusual choice for an Academy
You know what I
Award
mean? It's
nominated
like-
song, but Chris also forgot Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. So tonight, one of these nominees joins the roll call of Best Original Song. From Crash in the Deep, music by Kathleen Bird York and Michael Becker, lyric by Kathleen Bird York.
I mean, you could do this with,
From Hustle and
Any
Flow,
value
it's hard out
whatsoever.
here for a pimp.
You're saying
Music
the value
and lyric
is
by Jordan
subjective.
Houston, Cedric
But
Coleman,
even
and
if
Paul
they're subjective,
Beauregard.
there has to be an objective reference.
But
So I might not
Featuring
agree.
America,
Morality
Traveling
doesn't
Through,
exist without
music
God,
and
though,
lyric by
according
Dolly Parton.
Khan. And I was wondering why he thinks that morality doesn't exist if there's no.
Well,
God. Is it because it's a long time
if we
ago
were to
and-
say,
They can't conceive of
It's
God?
Hard Out There Here for a Pimp was the best song.
Mhm.
You're familiar with this, right? Didn't I play this once already?
I don't
No.
think so.
No? So this is the song that won the 2006 Oscar.
The Oscar goes to. It's hard out here for a pimp. Oh my God. Jordan Houston, Cedric Coleman, and Paul Beauregard. It's hard out for a pimp. Hustle and
Dolly
So-
Parton's like.
So here's the song. Not sure with the links. We had the
Pour it out, you know?
well, I won't play the whole thing.
You know it's hard out here for a pimp when he tryna get his money for the rent. For a Cadillac and gas money spent, cause a whole lot of bitches tryna shit. You know it's hard out here for a pimp when he tryna get his money for the rent.
So this won the Oscar in 2006 for the best music America produced. And if you put the Oscars at the top of that thing, well,
In a movie.
so I mean, I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't have picked it. Obviously, the committee that was in charge of it selected it, and of course, you know, they had a limited number of songs too. So, you know, they're looking at what other competitive songs there were. But how can they make that kind of a decision? If it's like a coin toss, that's not a real valuative system, that's chance, right? So there must have been criteria by which they measured which song was the best. It might have been subjective, I mean, by definition, it would be a subjective choice. I imagine eventually it can be a scientific choice if we, in a sense, program a computer to select on certain criteria. We're moving in that direction, right? But so the criteria themselves would be essentially the absolute. So in that sense, when it comes to ethics, to morality, for Kant, God is the criterion by which there is good and evil, God being, by definition, the good. So
Okay, I think I
if
remember
you don't have a highest value, you don't have a chain of possible values, right? Now, of course, it might not be it isn't by definition the case that we can conceive of the highest value. Paul Tillich was another who used a very similar argument and called it that. Paul Tillich called it our ultimate concern. So his definition definition of God is tied up in our ultimate concern. So it's not like you're really going to be able to, I think, identify your ultimate concern. But, so in a sense, if you're a human being and you have subjective, now, can you be a human being and have goals that are different, values that are different? Absolutely. And where would those come from? Where would they come from? That's kind of interesting. Where your intuitions come from. But remember, that was a fault that Kant had. For Kant, he thought all rational people are going to have exactly the same set of values. And given that he was a pietist from Königsberg, never left there, was totally unaware of differences in culture. So obviously he knew that there were differences in people, and that's why he stipulated that if you're a rational person, and what he meant by rational was that you think the way I think, right? There's something wrong with you if you don't think the way I think. There's a lot of people that think that way. Today, of course, we realize that that's egocentric. That's wrong for you to think that your way or the highway, right? Mom and dad can get away with that, but not everybody. But so that was Kant's argument, and it's really intriguing because I would argue that there have to be values that enable us to make choices. So even if you don't know what that highest value is, even if I'm like going down the highway and the family's all saying, we need hamburgers or something, and so I'm now at the point where Burger King's there, Carl Jr.'s over, McDonald's over there, right? I am now going to have to make a decision. Which of those fast food joints are we going to go to, and I make a decision. I made that decision probably using, remember, what is it, Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, and the newest, So this is pretty famous already because everybody sort of says, yes, our brain has two different ways of thinking. The one is fast and the other is slow. And so fast is like you're rapid into it. Yes? Thanks.
This made me think of something related, and makes me think about mind-body connection and interaction, because your body has fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. Do you know what I'm referencing?
No, but yes. I mean, I've never heard them called that, but I would imagine I have.
Yeah.
Rapid response things. And unfortunately, under some circumstances, like, about the time I ran over the rabbit. When I was driving down the road and the rabbit darted out in front of me and would have made it across, except my rapid response was to go, fast thinking, and so I ran over it in the middle of the lane over here. It would have gotten away had I not done that. So I stopped and got out, and I was sad, looking at this poor crushed rabbit.
I just thought it
And
was.
remember, the woman pulled up behind. Didn't I tell you this?
No,
the
no,
woman
you
pulled
didn't
up
tell us
behind
this
me,
one.
and she saw what had happened, and she said, I might be able to help. So she went back to her car and came back with a can of spray of some sort. Started liberally just spraying this rabbit. And sure enough, eventually it like sat up and looked at us and went like this. And then hopped a little bit and looked at us and went like this, and then hopped still further and went like this, and then hopped all the way over to the woods, did this one more time, and went hopping off into the woods.
What did she spray?
I was, what on earth did you do? And she showed me the can, and it was hairspray revives dead hair and creates permanent waves.
You're horrible. I was actually being serious about that. The thinking fast and slow.
What does that have to do with fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers? I don't understand.
Okay,
the
well,
connection.
basically what I'm talking about is, okay, so this is, thinking fast and slow and different thought processes or methods for
I know, I
different
know,
things or
it's
whatever, right?
I'm gonna say
But
my husband
your
later. I was telling you jokes.
your body has fast twitch and slow
Right,
twitch
but
muscle fibers. And
that has to do with aerobic and anaerobic respiration.
right, but I'm just thinking, it just inspired me to think about like, oh, mind-body connection, analogies between
Well,
the body,
so-
analogies between the mind,
So he recommends, like,
overlap,
if you're
you know.
going to go and pick furniture for your living room, you should go and look at what they have, and then go home and think about it. And when you come in, you pick whatever just occurs to you. So you're basically using fast thinking, right? But where slow thinking is where we're evaluating arguments using logic and rational judgment. That takes a while. We have a slow, long, drawn-out argument. So we are using different parts of the brain. The amygdala, I'm sure, would be involved in the fast thinking. But so if we're choosing a value, and I suddenly say, okay, we're going to McDonald's. That wasn't because I sat down and I evaluated, how far they were, what the prices would be, how good the meal is. I mean, my wife would be calculating calories, which one has the calorie list that would be better for you, et cetera. I might be thinking, well, McDonald's takes my military ID card and gives us 10% off. Plus, I think McDonald's is overall the cheapest. And I remember Consumer Reports saying that a McDonald's cheeseburger was the best food value in the world, ever. So if you believe their calculations, et cetera. But still, it's like, one kind of thinking. There's another kind of thinking that you could use. But I would think that when we're selecting, say, the best song, we might not have adequate criteria to do what a computer might do to choose it. But nonetheless, we've got some sort of criterion to select it. So that kind of supports Kant's argument. On the other hand, since there are lots of different people, lots of different kinds of, there's different kinds of songs, folk songs, jazz, symphonic music, operatic music, pop. I mean, and locations, shower, running, the kind of music you would use while you were jogging would not be the same kind of music you would want to listen to while you were sitting in the theater in the dark, I would think, right? So there's different kinds of music, different kinds of environments for music, and so on. So if I were to say, okay, so Charles Murray argues that Mozart and Beethoven are the best composers that ever lived, period, so far. No matter what culture, because if you examine even Japanese culture, the Japanese would actually agree with that by the way they vote, with the internet, basically, et cetera. And then you can try to figure out, now, why might that be, right? But you do have all different kinds. So how would you evaluate the best that's out there? But the very next generation, Fichte comes along and says that there really can't be a barrier. You really have to be able to know the self. What can I know more than myself? I mean, I have to know myself. And obviously we know things, and if you say you can't possibly know God, what kind of Christian are you when Christianity requires that you know God, right? You have faith in God. But he didn't help get out of that dilemma. He just said it can't be there. Hegel and his generation came out and basically argued, well, the reason we can know all of this stuff is not because there's no barrier, it's because it's all phenomena. If we think about it, if we have a concept of God that we could argue about, that's part of what we're aware of. That's part of our, so the ideas that we have in our head are part of the phenomena that we experience. They're abstract ideas. I wouldn't think of my concept of God as existing in time and space, for example. It exists somehow in my thinking, right? And I wouldn't put that, I could put it in time. Obviously, I had that thought before I had the idea that, well, if there is a God, then there would be vanilla ice cream. Right? Before you can have butter pecan ice cream, you have to have chocolate ice cream. No, I'm just being a bit silly. So Hegel and his generation basically give us this argument then that everything is what they called Geist. And that's an interesting word. So it's obviously the German word that gives us ghost in English. But it's more than ghost, it's spirit. But also mind. So it's like cultural mind. So for think of different uses. Heilige Geist. So the Holy Ghost, right? Which is the Zeitgeist is the Hegelian concept, which means the spirit of the times, right? So it's the culture of the times, obviously changing. So for Hegel, Napoleon was the spirit of the times on a horse, because he literally saw him riding by. He was in Jena. He had just finished writing the phenomenology. He was looking out his window on the main street, and there goes Napoleon leading his forces on a white horse riding down the street. So you can literally see the zeitgeist in person riding down the street. Now, obviously, so if we say Trump, we might feel absolute, horrors, but and for many people, Trump is the zeitgeist, right? And notice it's not just in this country; it's also happening in Europe. The right is becoming stronger, empowered, and so on. So if we think of it as kind of the spirit is kind of like a pendulum swinging. Went this way. Obama maybe I don't know that Obama was really that far left, but then comes back, and now we've got Trump. It's kind of like the spirit of the times. A lot of people wouldn't agree, so just because a particular individual might be the spirit, represent the spirit of the times. An interesting way, I think, if you picture a surfer in a wave, on a surfboard, as the surfer kind of, just surfs in front of the wave, right? You know that he's reading the wave. He's playing the wave, so he knows how to kind of stay ahead of it. But in a way, you can also view that as if he's like pulling the wave in. It's almost like he's leading, the momentum of the ocean, right? And so in a sense, you could think, oh, Trump is the one that's leading everybody in. Or you could think of Trump as being indicative of the movement of the times, right? And that doesn't mean that, of course, that he'll continue to use of it, right? And by the way, this leads to a problem for Hegel and for others who are Hegelians, and that's called the great man thesis or theory. So the great man theory, the problem, there's Napoleon. How about that? I didn't go to that page before, and there it is, Napoleon's right there. The idea is, for Hegel, this is the guy that's kind of the spirit of the times, with that kind of surfboard behavior, right? Knows where the people are going, and and takes them there. So in a way, looks like. But it prompts the question: if Napoleon wasn't Napoleon, would someone else have been Napoleon? In other words, the times called for someone with this kind of personality. So if Trump wasn't Trump, would someone else have been Trump and done remarkably similar things?
No.
It's just there's no way you could actually test this and say, okay, let's take Trump out of the picture, from 2016, and see who else would have been in there. Chris Christie. No, I don't think so. Chris Christie was not a golfer. Okay, that could have been funny.
Dr. Carson?
Chris Christie, Dr. Carson.
Dr. Carson.
I think there are reasons why Dr. Carson would not have done that either.
No, I'm just saying I like him. He would have been a better pick.
I love the guy that portrayed him in the movie. That was pretty interesting.
What movie?
What movie? Yeah.
Dr. Carson. He was the neurologist that saved that boy.
I didn't
You don't remember
that
that?
movie. No, I'm not familiar with
You
that.
don't remember the movie? That's how
No.
I learned about him first.
What movie?
And you're the movie buff.
I know movies a little bit, but I mean, I can't watch them all, I mean,
This is true.
huh? Who knew?
Television drama.
Okay, that's why. I don't watch TV.
So you like Cuba Gooding Jr.?
That's what it looks like.
Cuba Gooding Jr.?
Hmm.
That's the guy.
Is that the guy? He's the guy that played it.
Yeah, I like him.
See, in the movie, he never said anything goofy. Sorry, that's.
Must have been slow thinking for the movie.
Oh, that was awesome. Good one. That was good. She got me.
It just goes to show that you could be an absolutely excellent neuroscientist or neuro brain surgeon, whatever you would call it, not necessarily a good politician.
But maybe we need people who aren't politicians to take public office and make it less of a.
Of course,
Maybe
by
politics
definition,
need to be less
The minute you run for
political.
office, you've become a politician.
Okay, but maybe politics. I'm sorry, I kicked your stand there. Maybe politics need to become less political. Maybe they're overly. Maybe that it's gone on too far, too long.
Right then. Oh.
You know what I'm trying to say? I mean, I didn't say it good, but you know what I mean. I mean, maybe we need less professional, less career. Maybe we need more like normal people who actually really care and are trying to make a difference. I'm just
Like
saying.
politicians.
No. No. Which is
I've met a
another
lot
argument
of
for
politicians, and you know what? They're all normal people, which is, I guess, part of the problem. Matt Clayman, nice guy. Harry, oh my goodness, what's Harry's? I can't think of.
I don't
Harry's
like
last name.
Clayman. I like Marilyn Stewart.
Think of Harry's last name. Oh well, okay. So, pardon?
Said Belafonte?
No, Harry, Electrical Union, but he was a member of the legislature for a couple terms.
I forget his last name, but the owner of Bosco's Comic Shop is actually
He had a sign in my yard,
symbol.
actually, and it was, because he ran against Don Young 2 times before,
I have some idea who you're referencing.
Well, okay, well, so anyway, so next step then is, where does this go? Because at least if you're European, and actually Americans caught up, it became the social construction of reality. So if we look at this, this is the socially constructed. And language is one of the main ways that works then. So, for example, this is, I think, it's short.
Cologuard, colon cancer screening for people 50 and older at average
Sorry
risk.
about that.
I've heard a lot of excuses to avoid
Is that
screening.
because they think I deserve this commercial?
I eat plenty of cake.
Listen,
No
all you
comment.
need is a trip to the bathroom.
Ask your doctor if Cologuard is right for you.
Well, as a matter of fact,
I'm messing with you. I have no
I've had several of those. Not the cancer part, just the colonoscopy.
They make you do it.
So I'll be speaking to you using language because I can. This is one of these magical abilities that we humans have. We can transmit really complicated thoughts to one another. So what I'm doing right now is I'm making sounds with my mouth as I'm exhaling. I'm making tones and hisses and puffs, and those are creating air vibrations in the air. Those air vibrations are traveling to you, they're hitting your eardrums, and then your brain takes those vibrations from your eardrums and transforms them into thoughts. I hope. I hope that's happening. So, because of this ability, we humans are able to transmit our ideas across vast reaches of space and time. Right? We're able to transmit knowledge across minds. I can put a bizarre new idea in your mind right now. I could say, imagine a jellyfish waltzing in a library while thinking about quantum mechanics. Right? Now, if everything has gone relatively well in your life so far, you probably haven't had that thought before. But now I've just made you think it through language. Right? Now, of course, there isn't just one language in the world. There are about 7,000 languages spoken around the world. And all the languages differ from one another in all kinds of ways. So some languages have different sounds, they have different vocabularies, and they also have different structures, very importantly, different structures. That begs the question, does the language we speak shape the way we think? Now, this is an ancient question. People have been speculating about this question for forever. Charlemagne, Holy Roman Emperor, said, to have a second language is to have a second soul. Strong statement that language crafts reality. But on the other hand, Shakespeare has Juliet say, what's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet.
She was wrong.
Well, that suggests that maybe language doesn't craft reality. These arguments have gone back and forth for thousands of years. But until recently, there hasn't been any data to help us decide either way. Recently, in my lab and other labs around the world, we've started doing research, and now we have actual scientific data to weigh in on this question. So let me tell you about some of my favorite examples. I'll start with an example from an Aboriginal community in Australia that I had a chance to work with. These are the Cook Tyre people. They live in Pormpuraaw at the very west edge of Cape York. And what's cool about Cook Tyre is in Cook Tyre, they don't use words like left and right. And instead, everything is in cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And when I say everything, I really mean everything. You would say something like, oh, there's an ant on your southwest leg. Or move your cup to the north-northeast a little bit. In fact, the way that you say hello in Cook Tyre is you say, which way are you going? And the answer should be north-northeast in the far distance. How about you? So imagine as you're walking around your day, every person you greet, you have to report your heading direction. That would actually get you oriented pretty fast, right? Because you literally couldn't get past hello if you didn't know which way you're going. In fact, people who speak languages like this stay oriented really, really well. They stay oriented better than we used to think humans could. We used to think that humans were worse than other creatures because some biological excuse. Oh, we don't have magnets in our beaks or in our scales. No, if your language and your culture trains you to do it, actually you can do it. There are humans around the world who stay oriented really well. And just to get us in agreement about how different this is from the way we do it, I want you all to close your eyes for a second and point southeast. Now keep your eyes closed, point. Okay, so you can open your eyes. I see you guys pointing there, 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 there. I don't know which way it is myself. You have not been a lot of help. So let's just say the accuracy in this room is not very high. This is a big difference in cognitive ability across languages, right? Where one group, very distinguished group like you guys, doesn't know which way is which, but in another group, I could ask a 5-year-old and they would know. Right? There are also really big differences in how people think about time. So here I have pictures of my grandfather at different ages, and if I ask an English speaker to organize time, they might lay it out this way, from left to right. This has to do with writing direction. If you were a speaker of Hebrew, Arabic, you might do it going in the opposite direction, from right to left. How would the Kuuk-Thaayorre, this Aboriginal group I just told you about, do it? They don't use words like left and right. Let me give you a hint. When we sat people facing south, they organized time from left to right. When we sat them facing north, they organized time from right to left. When we sat them facing east, time came towards the body. What's the pattern? East to west, right? So for them, time doesn't actually get locked on the body at all. It gets locked on the landscape. So for me, if I'm facing this way, then time goes this way. If I'm facing this way, then time goes this way. If I'm facing this way, time goes this way. Very egocentric of me to have the direction of time chase me around every time I turn my body. For the Kuuk-Thaayorre, time is locked on the landscape. It's a dramatically different way of thinking about time. Here's another really smart human trick. Suppose I ask you, how many penguins are there? Well, I bet I know how you'd solve that problem if you solved it. You went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You counted them, right? You named each one with a number, and the last number you said was the number of penguins. Now this is a little trick that you're taught to use as kids. You learn the number list and you learn how to apply it. A little linguistic trick. Well, some languages don't do this because some languages don't have exact number words. They're languages that don't have a word like 7 or a word like 8. And in fact, people who speak these languages don't count, and they have trouble keeping track of exact quantities. So for example, if I ask you to match this number of penguins to the same number of ducks, you would be able to do that by counting, but folks who don't have that linguistic trick can't do that. Languages also differ in how they divide up the color spectrum, the visual world. Some languages have lots of words for colors, some have only a couple words, light and dark, and languages differ in where they put boundaries between colors. So, for example, in English there's a word for blue that covers all of the colors that you can see on the screen, but in Russian there isn't a single word. Instead, Russian speakers have to differentiate between light blue, голубой, and dark blue, синий. So Russians have this lifetime of experience of, in language, distinguishing these two colors. When we test people's ability to perceptually discriminate these colors, what we find is that Russian speakers are faster across this linguistic boundary. They're faster to be able to tell the difference between a light and a dark blue. But when you look at people's brains as they're looking at colors, say you have colors shifting slowly from light to dark blue, the brains of people who use different words for light and dark blue will give a surprise reaction as the colors shift from light to dark, as if, ooh, something has categorically changed. Whereas the brains of English speakers, for example, that don't make this categorical distinction, don't give that surprise, because nothing is categorically changing. Languages have all kinds of structural quirks. This is one of my favorites. Lots of languages have grammatical gender. So every noun gets assigned a gender, often masculine or feminine, and these genders differ across languages. So for example, the sun is feminine in German, but masculine in Spanish, and the moon the reverse. Could this actually have any consequence for how people think? Do German speakers think of the sun as somehow more female-like, and the moon somehow more male-like? Actually, it turns out that's the case. So if you ask German and Spanish speakers to, say, describe a bridge, like the one here, the bridge happens to be grammatically feminine in German, grammatically masculine in Spanish. German speakers are more likely to say bridges are beautiful, elegant, and stereotypically feminine words, whereas Spanish speakers will be more likely to say they're strong or long, these masculine words. Languages also differ in how they describe events, right? So you take an event like this, an accident. In English, it's fine to say he broke the vase. In a language like Spanish, you might be more likely to say the vase broke or the vase broke itself. If it's an accident, you wouldn't say that someone did it. In English, quite weirdly, we can even say things like, I broke my arm. Now, in lots of languages, you couldn't use that construction unless you are a lunatic and you went out looking to break your arm and you succeeded, right? If it was an accident, you would use a different construction. Now, this has consequences. So people who speak different languages will pay attention to different things depending on what their language usually requires them to do. So you show the same accident to English speakers and Spanish speakers. English speakers will remember who did it because English requires you to say, he did it, he broke the vase. Whereas Spanish speakers might be less likely to remember who did it if it's an accident, but they're more likely to remember that it was an accident. They're more likely to remember the intention. So two people watch the same event, witness the same crime, but end up remembering.
There's, of course, a couple things I want to constantly interrupt her and add on to what she's saying or say other things, but the quiz question for the first part of the class tonight will be, how do you think this distinction between different languages would help explain some of the problems, the issues that we're having today? I'm thinking, for example, the migrants. What language do they speak? I saw a picture of a couple of border guards talking with several migrants who were kind of lounging on the border, wall, fence, whatever you want to call it. And it looked like they were just having a pleasant conversation. And it occurred to me that, well, the border guards must speak more than one language if they were able to engage these migrants who are even sitting on the wall, right? In pleasant conversation. So they must have selected border guards. Do you remember Trump meeting a National Guardsman about a month ago, whose name was like Gonzalez or something, and Trump congratulated Gonzalez on speaking English very well. And yet, that was kind of a surprise for him because he was a native English speaker, right? Just because his name was Spanish didn't mean that he was a native Spanish speaker that had learned English and then was, so Trump was just being the buffoon, and not realizing that complimenting a guy on something would have, been actually more of an insult, to say that.
So the question is, how do you think this distinction between languages?
This recognition that different languages, and she hasn't finished yet. I'll let her finish. But what she's pointing out is that when we think of the socially constructed reality today, and we think of how the world appears to us today, this issue, especially language, not just language, but other aspects of things, are all going to have an impact on the way we view the world, right? So a difference in language is going to have an impact on the way you view something. And when she's talking about the accident here with the vase, the guy bends over to get a better picture of the one vase, and his butt knocks the vase, which I'm sure was worth thousands of dollars. If I imagine that picture was a setup, right? It was funny picture. Hopefully, Otherwise, the museum was pretty dumb setting that up, for him
Well,
to
most of the items in museums are
are situated in a way that they're
They
more
are.
protected. Yeah,
very well done replicas.
that could be. Or they're like our Imaginarium, where they're, the things are nailed in so that the kids can't, they could, and the thing is gonna stay there.
So how do you think this distinction between languages?
Explains the divisive issues. Because she's talking about 7,000 languages, and I've always been puzzled at how you would actually even discern the borders of a language. But for sure, today we would also think in terms of sub-languages within a group. So, perfect example, there are 250 different neuroscience specialties. And from what I understand, that the specialist in some of those specialties can't talk to the specialist in other specialties because their vocabulary is different. And yet they're neuroscientists. 250 in the neuroscience specialty. That's like, how narrow a scope must those individuals, be in their laboratories, what they're studying. And then they can't even talk to other individuals that would have to be medical scientists, medical, neurologists, and then, specific, how difficult would that be to be able to speak all of the languages needed in order to communicate between them, and yet apparently not, right? So if you think of those as languages too, different vocabularies. Remember from the get-go, I suggested that what we're doing here is learning the peculiar vocabulary associated with philosophy, right? So if you think, okay, so that's where we're at today. Well, we think in terms of Kant's categories, right? We don't just have 12 categories that we've used to frame things. We frame things through our language. Through Sini, Goluboy, which, by the way, studying Russian for, 16 plus years, plus all the years I've been retired, I still speak Russian. That doesn't mean that I'm faster at recognizing, this is light blue and this is dark blue. I don't. You would have had to have been born and raised that. By the way, in a different, she has other presentations. This is just the shortest one I found that summarizes that. In some of her longer ones, she fielded a question from a gentleman that asked, are all children capable of learning all languages? Are there other questions like about the universality of language and so on, the universal characteristics? She said, yes, well, of course, all human languages have to be capable of being learned by humans. So, yeah, there are, universal characteristics. And then there are other differences. But the interesting thing she pointed out, and this is something I'm sure you know too, is that a child is already linguistic by the time they're born, because they're hearing the languages around them while they're in the womb. You can hear from when your mind is developing, and I'm pointing as if I'm pregnant, and I'm not, I've never had that experience. The only male I ever knew to have been pregnant was Arnold Schwarzenegger in that movie, where he said, it's not a tumor.
Those twins.
Twins?
No, it's
Junior.
She's correct, yeah. Twins is the one where he was with Danny DeVito.
Yeah, I like that one too. I like Arnold.
Arnold. Yeah. I played the movie, the musical for you, right?
Yes, we
Yes.
coded.
Yeah.
Mhm.